Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, not 10 days ago, I spoke at second reading of C-30. And in fact, it was the Deputy Government House Leader who asked me at that time to compare Canada to the rest of the world in terms of economic performance. And I told him at that time that Canada's record should be able to stand on its own and that he and his government shouldn't continue to push up inflationary spending. But I've got good news, Madam Speaker, and that is that I'm not alone in my thinking, and that as of yesterday, an article by Diane Francis was published. And it reads, Canada need only look to Australia to see how badly the Liberals have messed up. And I'm going to quote from this article, Madam Speaker. It says, the current government is economically illiterate, and the result is the country slowly sinking into the rankings of most economic metrics among the world's developed nations who are members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. An OECD report from October 2021 predicts, according to the Business Council of British Columbia commentary, that Canada will be the worst performing advanced economy over 2020 to 2030. It also forecasts, Madam Speaker, that Canada will have the worst economic growth among advanced economies over, wait for it, 2030 to 2060. In other words, Madam Speaker, Canada will be dead last, not only for the next decade, but also for the next 3 decades after that. Canada's former central bank chief, Stephen Pulitz, at the recent Global Business Forum in Banff said, Canada is a chronic underachiever, a condition caused by poor political decisions and the failure to address unresolved issues. He also went on to say, we get in our own way. We get in our own way, Madam Speaker. What is he really saying? Madam Speaker, I believe he's saying, government, get out of the way. He went on to list a few problems. He started by indicating a political quagmire that requires a crisis to make a decision. For example, I have this article here, Madam Speaker, that states the Transport Minister knew in May of 2021 that federal airport security workforce was short-staffed by up to 25%, according to a briefing note that he received. And at the time, he blamed airport delays on Canadians eager to travel. Staff in a May 13 briefing note to airport and flight delays told the minister the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority was short a quarter of its employees due to COVID layoffs. The authority retained 75% of its workforce during the pandemic to assist with the recovery, wrote the staff. Screening contractors called back all available personnel in preparation for the summer peak. So an example here where we had a political quagmire that required a crisis to make a decision, Madam Speaker. Mr. Pulitz went on to say layers of regulation. Madam Speaker, I have here an example where the National Capital Commission decided not to grant a permit for a lemonade stand as a result of regulation. In 2016, these regulations were the basis for which the Crown Corporations shut down a lemonade stand operated by 7 and 5-year-old sisters, unbelievable, Madam Speaker, on NCC property in Ottawa. Their transgression, the girls had failed to acquire a $1,500 per day permit from the NCC. The incident garnered Canada-wide media coverage, and the NCC quickly apologized and backtracked, allowing the children to resume selling lemonade the next weekend to avoid similar incidents. The NCC developed a special permit for the following summer that would allow kids to sell lemonade or other goods on specific NCC property during 9 Sundays. The new permit had 15 requirements, including 2, but not limited to, requirement for bilingual signage, stand size restrictions, adherence to municipal and provincial health and safety regulations, on an indemnification clause, and reporting of all revenues to the NCC for a lemonade stand, Madam Speaker. So layers of regulation, Madam Speaker, from this government causing problems here. Permit and consultation that take ages to complete, Madam Speaker. Well, the Trans Mountain Pipeline does indeed come to mind. I'll have you know, Madam Speaker, Canada is one of the most highly taxed economies on earth, which is discouraging, as is quoted by Mr. Palats. And I've got some information here on that, Madam Speaker. G20 countries with a lower tax rate than Canada, Madam Speaker, include Saudi Arabia, Russia, Brazil, India, and Indonesia, Madam Speaker. This is the company that the current government is keeping at this time. As well, Madam Speaker, Mr. Palats's final comment was regards to interprovincial barriers that cost 4% a year in GDP alone to Canada. And in fact, a study as done by Deloitte indicates that current interprovincial taxes, as unfixed by this government, suggests average Canadian wages would climb by 5.5% if this government would address that, resulting in a 5% increase in household income and more than $2,100 in real GDP per person. And corporate profits, which I know the NDP don't like, would increase by 2%. Madam Speaker, so all of these actions resulting in Canada not living up to its economic potential. But the sad thing is, Madam Speaker, is that this doesn't simply rest with numbers and the economy alone. These numbers have real effects on people, as is evidenced by the article by Elikja Siksira, and an MNP survey where it says Canadians are finding it more difficult to pay for food, housing, and transportation, and nearly half are on the brink of insolvency as rising interest rates and soaring inflation continue to weigh on household budgets. Madam Speaker, I hear this from my constituents in Calgary-Minipur all the time. Gregory writes, I would like to express further concern regarding our family's electricity and gas bill. It has skyrocketed, perhaps tripled, while our usage has remained the same. We have no option other than to pay, and we can't let our children freeze in the winter, but we cannot afford this dramatically rising cost. Please use your influence to fight for a regulation of this industry to bring costs down. Thank you for your efforts on our behalf. We are growing increasingly horrified by our federal government and appreciate your efforts to stand up for us. This MNP survey also found that 45% of its respondents say it's becoming less affordable to pay for transportation, up 9 percentage points from last year. Another 45% say it's becoming more difficult to pay for clothing and other household necessities, an increase of 5 percentage points from last year. Paying for housing is also a challenge for many Canadians, with 37% saying it's becoming less affordable. At the same time, Madam Speaker, Canadians are finding it more difficult to save. This survey found that 49% say it's becoming less affordable to put money aside for savings, up 5 percentage points from last year. Canadians, as our leader has pointed out, Madam Speaker, are putting more of their paychecks towards paying for basic necessities, such as the cost of living rises, which is in turn leaving less of a financial buffer to manage the impacts of current and potential future interest rate hikes, Madam Speaker. And again, Madam Speaker, I hear from my constituents about this. Cindy writes to me. She is worried about supply chains. This is directly impacting our jobs and has been for 12 plus months now. And the government's had lots of time to respond to this as well. The impact of supply chain issues is going to become a global tragedy very soon. Rising cost of living. Yes, she lists exactly the things we've been talking about in the House, Madam Speaker. Heating, gas, food, housing, all 4 areas are a concern for Cindy's home. The increase in overall federal tax is criminal. They have misspent billions of tax dollars, and it is a feeling of helplessness, Madam Speaker, for the average Canadian. Again, tax on sale of home. Again, this is criminal for the federal government to even consider this as an option, which they have flirted with doing due to their lack of fiscal management. Someone, Madam Speaker, she is writing, someone has to stop these decisions. Well, I am telling you, Madam Speaker, that I and my Conservative colleagues are here to stop these decisions, along with Diane Francis, along with Elikja Steretsky, along with my constituencies, Gregory and Cindy. We say to the Liberal government, get out of the way.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Well, I must admit, Madam Speaker, I found it very shocking to hear that somebody would be told that they have to shut down a lemonade stand. And so I Googled it, and in fact, the member is right. Back in 2016, there were two sisters, 11 years old, who set up a lemonade stand and actually made $52 in less than 2 hours before somebody on a cyclist stopped them to tell them they weren't allowed to be doing that. And then, of course, as she said shortly later, somebody from the NCR showed up and told me, so I think it's ludicrous that would happen. When you have young kids that are trying to pursue entrepreneurial spirit like that, I would agree completely. But is the member aware that this happened in 2016? This government was elected in the fall of 2015. Does this member think that this government on day one instituted rules with the National Capital Commission that prevented the ability to sell lemonade? Or perhaps would there have been an opportunity in the preceding 10 years with the previous government to do something about it?
Yeah. The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I just first of all want to correct the member for Kingston, the Islands. It's the NCC, not the NCR, and they were 7 and 5 years old, not 11 years old. But on that point, Madam Speaker, I will say that this is the mentality of the Liberal government. They want to keep the Canadian people down. They want to control the Canadian people by taxing them to death and taking $1,000 and giving them $2 back. And we're not going to tolerate it, Madam Speaker. Right. I nor my Conservative colleagues are going to tolerate that, and certainly not under our new leader, the member for Carleton.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd ask my energetic colleague what she thinks of this. The Bloc Québécois proposes two things to limit the cost of living. The Bloc, for seniors especially, we'd want to not cut into OAS, those who benefited from CERB during the pandemic. Then the Bloc says we want to increase old age security to preserve the buying power of seniors. What does my colleague think of this? Go ahead.
For Calgary-Midnapore.
Thank you very much to my colleague for the question. Listen, I think the Bloc and us, we are both for seniors. It's really clear that the government is not for seniors. So it seems to me he has good ideas. I think we could have further conversations to determine how we can work together for seniors, because it's really clear that the government is doing nothing for seniors. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I was interested to hear a member opposite in her speech, and she had talked about comparing Canada to other countries. She read off a number of news articles, and it sort of sparked me to think about the articles that I have seen recently. One was how Liz Truss brought forward all of these she came into power with the Conservative Party in the UK with all these tax cut promises. And then, miraculously, there was this huge U-turn because it had crashed the economy into this horrible descent. And then the next article was about how they were desperately trying to figure out how to save the UK economy. And then the next one was about how the Labour Party was about 12 points up in the polls because of this disaster of the Conservative Party of the UK. Now, in comparison, the Conservatives in this country are arguing the exact same thing. So I'd love to hear about her comparison to their plan and the UK's Conservatives. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Calgary-Midnapore has less than a minute to respond.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much to my colleague. I'm not concerned, Madam Speaker, because frankly, we're leading the polls. We're up in the polls. And so I think we're doing the right things for Canadians, the right things that Canadians want to see. And guess what? We're going to continue doing them alongside our new leader, the member for Carleton, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate.